having a good chat with pianist Daniel Shapiro, Southern Californian, by the way, by birth and most of his raising, and now
Yes.
teaching at the Cleveland Institute of Music in Cleveland. And we are going to speak in a bit, sort of broadly, about the composer Franz Schubert, specifically about his Daniel's 3 DVD set, video set of the sonatas, most of them, I guess. Yeah, speak to me.
Yes.
In that three, is it
Basically,
all?
almost all of the
Oh,
major ones.
yeah, okay. But more importantly, and I think this is what really blew my brains out, frankly, made me feel extremely small intellectually, is your explication of the whole series in the sort of 38-minute opening. You say to people, hey, if you don't want to watch this stuff, let's just go right to the sonatas. I love that. But I have, and you discuss each of the sonatas, and what really got me is that, how to say this, something about people understand or people don't understand, and I'm going to about Schubert, the profound depth of humanity of this man. I think it's getting better and better
Yes.
and better. You would agree. I'm going to confess that I myself took me a long time to begin to recognize this genius. So I want to talk about all of that, but I want to give a little quote, and then we'll get going here. You have said, and it may sound a little a little corny, but it ain't, because I've watched all of your all of your videos. It's from the heart indeed. You've said, I have dedicated my life to bringing out the full depth and humanity of the works of the greatest composers through both my performances and my teaching. And that is exactly what we have in these 3 DVDs of the sonatas of Schubert. You are clear about your understanding of the basements and sub-basements of this genius. You discuss the joyful moments. He was a young man. There was a happy time. And then there was also the other side, I think you mentioned. So
Yes.
that's where let's see. Let's try and get this started. The DVDs were made in 2007. We're not going to go there because there's too much about Schubert to talk about, but just the manifestation of recording in a studio, video recording, and so on. What a challenge, I presume. Go ahead. Can you touch on that for just a bit about this
Yes.
whole process of making those CDs, aside from devoting hundreds and thousands of hours and all the rest of it? Go ahead. About the whole process. Why, how, what?
Well, first of all, I had help. I have a friend who is a terrific videographer who also happens to be a violinist in the Cleveland Orchestra. His name is Mark Dumm. Wonderful person and very skilled. And so we found a good venue, which is called Harkness Chapel on the campus of Case Western University. And luckily they had a nice Steinway. And so we filmed all of the sonatas there. We had to do it at night so that there wouldn't be, sirens or too many traffic noises and things like that. But we had to film all those sonatas, I don't know, in about 10 or so evenings or so. Uh, and then separately we filmed the commentary in a different place actually. And that involved, of course, a lot of graphics and editing and relaying from one to the other, and that got into Mark's expertise much more than my expertise. Uh,
But let me jump in right there,
yes.
because I think you mention it. You do mention it. I think I'm going to misquote you, so correct me soon. But you speak about somewhere in something I've read, or maybe you discussed in one of the DVDs, something about to approach Schubert that you have to be a genuine person. I'm paraphrasing as best I can. There has to be something very, very genuine, and that's exactly what I take away from your little mini lectures, your discussions, your playing in particular.
Thank you.
So,
I mean,
and it's very, very deep, and it has to be very, very deep with Schubert. I mean, this was a very profound, and this is what I love about writers and painters and all the rest of them. Remember, they stand at the side of the party and kind of observe, and then go home and write
yes,
masterpieces about it. And
yes, right.
that's how I think about Schubert,
Yeah.
this kind of little bespectacled, perhaps quiet gentleman who observed at such profound levels. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where can I go from there? Let's get clear. Daniel Shapiro, I mentioned you're on the piano faculty at the Cleveland Institute of Music, and of course you concertize all over the place, and you know you do lectures and recitals and solo concerti and all that stuff. And I guess you spent your undergraduate work at USC, because that's why I recognize all of these wonderful people in your life. I was kind of on the periphery there at Cal Arts, and kind of outside of the USC, and yet not. You know what I mean? If you're a musician in Southern California, you are involved in whatever USC is, as far as I recall from my youth. But studying with Natalie Lemanik, Koldovsky, Gwendolyn Koldovsky, and you mentioned, and this is where I'll give you a chance to chat a bit, because it's so integral to Schubert, and let alone the sonatas. You mentioned, and of course it's a given, really, the importance of working, collaborating, working with singers, the leader. Yes. Tell me about that, and I'm guessing about phrasing and so on. Color.
Yeah. Well, first of all, even well before I went to USC, I had studied with a wonderful lady who was a student of Arthur Schnabel. Her name was Joanna Graudan, and she she was unable to pay him for lessons, so she earned her keep, shall we say, by accompanying his wife, who was a great leader singer, Teresa Baer Schnabel. And so from her, she used to say, the road to Schubert is through his songs, were to that effect. So from her, I began to realize, the importance of knowing his songs. And then once you get exposed to that, it's hard to stop, of course. And so I got to know the cycles and many other songs. That, of course, when I got to USC and I got to work with Gwendolyn Koldovsky, who was the accompanist of Lotte Lehmann, who was one of my God heroes.
Santa Barbara Music Academy of the West. I was born after, but Lotte Lehmann is iconic in Santa Barbara. Anyway.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But yeah, and I found that just listening to great singers is so inspiring and so moving in so many ways. And I think all instrumentalists, whether it's oboists or violinists or pianists, will always say that we try to emulate the human voice. And so whether it's Verdi or Schubert, when one hears a singer, sing with that kind of directness and depth of expression, everything flows from there in a sense.
And as I think I mentioned to you, perhaps off camera, I hope not earlier in the interview, but the idea that I discovered through the letters between Brahms and the Schumanns, the intensity of romanticism in the early to mid 19th century, and this is where we have the Schumanns. Have you recorded Schumann? I think. Yeah, Beethoven anyway. No, but Beethoven.
Yes.
Beethoven, same thing, an early romantic. Can I say that? I think I can say that. You're the scholar, but I think, certainly an early romantic.
Makes sense.
Beethoven, we mentioned Schumann, Mendelssohn, and so on. That area of people and how they revered Beethoven. I'm talking about the Schumanns and Brahms.
Yes.
And Brahms, whom we all know, we kind of discuss him as a classicist in terms of his orchestration, his careful construction of pieces, but of course, a romantic. He was right there in the thick of it for sure. So, can you give me an idea? Give me an idea of this. Why, or is it exclusively this wonderful, which I think is a lifetime's worth of study, romantic period, the early romantic period, or to the mid 19th century? And I know you go beyond, but go ahead, give me it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I've heard it said that Romanticism really began, in a sense, even in Mozart's time. In literature, you find even 18th century the seeds of Romanticism, and it's a whole long discussion as to what Romanticism is and isn't, and what Classicism is and isn't. And it's easy to think that Classicism is kind of just order and form and without any emotion, and Romanticism is only emotion without order and form, and of course that's nonsense in both cases. And for me, Mozart's music is as passionate as Mahler's, it's just expressed differently. But Romanticism is also a very broad and complicated thing, many aspects of it, and many of those aspects come to the fore already in Schubert, with the idea of landscape and being outside and being with nature, the emphasis on that. And Brahms, of course, I mean, he is a classicist when you compare him to his antipode, which is Wagner, right? And Liszt and Berlioz in that, that direction. And Brahms just stuck with string quartets and absolute forms and that kind of thing. But at the same time, he had the romanticism and the fervor of the gypsies and the Hungarian style, which he loved. And so Brahms' music is really a kind of spectacular collision between classicism and romanticism.
Beautifully put.
But anyway, talking now about Brahms, we're getting off the topic. But I guess Schubert, for me, he used classical form, and form was very important to him, but romanticism was very much a part of Schubert, a part of Schubert.
And this may sound like an idiot question, but I have to ask it because I don't know. Is there any kind of progression? What I'm speaking of is Schubert certainly composed wonderful dances and jigs and men's choruses and all kinds of wonderful. Is there a discernible moment when there's the fatality of his final illness, or is there some melancholy throughout? I'm just kind of curious. I think there's melancholy throughout. I don't know why, but speak to that.
I think throughout. Yeah.
Have any idea why?
Well, first of all, when you're a composer as great as Schubert, the music is multi-dimensional, just as Mozart's music, is poignant and joyful at the same time. So is Schubert's. But even beyond that, as I think I mentioned in the DVDs, already with the Earl King, which is a very early song, you have this terror and the specter of death, and and that's really, everything kind of came from that. You find it over and over, this macabre element, this scary, freaky element. So it's really there from the start, from the get-go.
And the start for me, I can't believe this segued perfectly into a question that has been a product kind of my learning over the past few years. I had no idea, really until recently, that the Napoleonic Wars were in fact the World War of the 19th century, and disrupted millions of people, you know what I mean, killed a devastating event in Europe, 1812, 1815, something like that, and how profoundly, as we know with Winterreise and other works of Schubert, let alone the others, had profoundly affected composers, writers, everybody. So therefore, I was so taken when you helped me become a better critic, understanding and I should have known from Berlioz even, but the skeletal dancing themes. Remember you discussed that in one of your things that never occurred to me, and so on. Does that have anything to do in terms of dates? I'm being a little too technical possibly, but I'm so intrigued by how that World War, the Napoleonic Wars, affected everybody right into the 1820s and 30s and maybe even 40s ago. Maybe even the romantic response to all of that death and destruction all by itself. I just came upon that. I hope I get a prize for it. Go ahead, see if you can see if you can answer.
I would simply say that death was much more present. I mean, not only war, but diseases and the lack of cure for venereal disease, which killed Schubert and so on. So death was just much more a part of life than it is nowadays, I think. And so it was thought about more, and it was composed about more, you could say, from wars and famines and diseases and everything else. It was just a bigger part of life than it is now. Thank God.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And I keep thinking eroica, as in, composers saw, witnessed, and spoke to the events of that. What had to have been. Imagine that, it was bad enough in the 20th century, those two world wars, let alone the 19th century when people just died. You know what I mean? You get wounded, you die. You get cut with a sword, you die. So, stuff like that. Okay, enough of that jolly stuff. But now I want to talk just for a bit about. I think we've touched on it, but I want you to tell me about color and imagery in Schubert, and how one discovers and finds it, them, they, and what they mean, and so on. Did I make any sense? Color and imagery in Schubert.
Okay.
In this,
first of all, the idea of pianists talk a lot about color. Somebody will say so and so is a very colorful pianist or plays with lots of colors. And I've always been a little mystified by that term. What does it mean that this note is red and this note is pink and this note is blue? And if you touch the note this way, it's purple. If you touch it that way, it's green, and so on.
But that's too literalist an interpretation.
Yeah. But I mean, I think for me, color for the pianist is, I would liken it to, we could say, emotional hue. Like a given passage or section will have a certain emotion, but within that emotion there are 1,000 gradations of emotion. Just as a hue is a gradation of a color, so you could talk about an emotional hue. And in going for that, I think, I'm happy to say that people say that, people sometimes said that I play with a lot of colors, but I don't think when I'm playing that I'm trying to play in red, green, or purple or whatever. But I do think of these, subtleties of emotions, and in doing so, one produces, I guess, when all goes well, a great variety of sound, which can be interpreted as color.
How about imagery? Because you've now slapped me down about color. I'm going to remember that next time. I've mentioned some terrible things about twirling and twisting when I referred to something with dancers, and they immediately shot me down. So I think color, I'm going to have to be more guarded in my use of the word. But how about imagery?
Imagery. Well, I think, especially with Schubert, I think lots of imagery of nature is helpful in to think about when performing Schubert, and just the idea of a landscape and of being in different geographies, different terrains, and the way things look, the ecosystem of where you're in. And I think sometimes even whole pieces of music kind of inhabit a kind of ecosystem where certain plants and foliage or colors are predominant and others are not so much. So the G major sonata of Schubert has a very definite kind of natural scene or scenario, which is obviously very different from the B flat or the C minor.
Yeah, exactly. And that formula, I wish I had kept the book. I think that one went out in a downsizing. But the famous text that determines in whatever 1662 or something, you know what I might be referring to. This text that determines exactly key area and its relationship to emotional response, even that early, whatever, early Baroque music and so on. That text, and of course it holds true. It's like I Ching. I mean, it's just a truism. Yeah. But that's why I wanted to. That's what I mean. That's what I mean about color. Maybe I'm trying to get out of this hole here, but color, about evoking a scene with sound, color that then evokes an emotional response. There, I think I saved myself.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right on. And I think, something in A major for me has a certain sunniness, and so there's a certain golden quality, you could say, and an optimistic, joyful quality, to be overly simplistic about it. And so in the two sonatas in A major, to varying degrees, have that quality in it.
Yeah. And you mentioned, and we all know in music G minor, Mozart, his use of G minor, that key area, that color, if you will. So it's amazing, and I think it speaks to the power of music, this thing that we've pursued, for better or worse. Just the tremendous power of painting, of course, has imagery and all that stuff, but there's something about the aural penetration into the deep, dark corners of the brain that is amazing. Yes. And I think, I'm trying to bring this full circle here, I think Schubert understood this. And spoke to it very subtly. Presumably, I presume he wasn't expecting to be understood for some time, maybe even. You know what I mean? That deep a mind.
Yeah. Well, of course. I mean, I think Schubert is accessible on many levels. I mean, his music is superficially very pleasant to listen to. It's very tuneful, and all of that. But then, if you listen to the music again and again, you realize that it's more than just pleasant tunes, and so one can, like any great master, you can approach it at very different levels and in different ways, depending on how long you know it and what time of life you're in, and various things as well.
Boy, you touched on something that would take another hour. This idea of how we mature over the years. I'm speaking about my own naivete, which is probably still there, but you know what I mean. I conducted things I should never have conducted in my 20s. I had no idea, and so on. There's not knowing. Finally, learning how the process works. Daniel Shapiro, I just want to thank you. Let's run down it once again. I'm going to put up on the website, performingartsreview.net, this video interview, and links to buy on Amazon. People can buy the 3 DVD set. And I really, right. And as you said, I think earlier at some point, there's also apparently a 5 CD recording. Is that correct, or are we in trouble again?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I made the 3 DVDs and the 5 CDs. Those are not available on Amazon, but if you contact me, then I can get. If somebody wants to contact me, they can through my website. Then I can get them the CDs. Okay,
I'll put all that good stuff up and then pop this out to my guys at performingartsreview.net. And it's just been, I love visual. I think that really is the way of society. Mm-hmm. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just the way we're moving. I read, but I struggle. And I was an avid reader. You know perhaps what I'm trying to say. We're just in a paradigm shift. So I love the idea that these sonatas are on video. I love that you speak very intelligently. There's no condescension. It's very intelligent speak to us about each of these profound pieces. So, boy, for students, they should snap this up. I'll see if I can see if I can help you a little bit there. Anyway, great pleasure. Thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it much. It's been a long time coming. It's been an interesting learning curve for myself in terms of all these CDs and videos to review, but it's been a great experience for me here as well. Wonderful speaking with you, Daniel.
Well, thank you. I would say that thanks for the opportunity to talk about this, because I made those commentaries, but I don't really consider myself a lecturer or an orator by any means, and I don't like to pontificate, because very often I feel as soon as I say something, I immediately think that the opposite is true, or what that I'm saying is not really true.
I see you're one of those genius insecure types.
Excuse me. On the other hand, I could talk with a musician about Schubert or whatever for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and be perfectly happy. I like nothing more than that.
Well, these are all
about this.
These are all wonderful. I'm going to tell everybody all of your explications. I don't know where that word came from, about 1892 or something, but all of your explications about all of the sonatas. And again, people can just, professionals who've been there a million times can just listen to the sonatas, and the performances are fabulous. The recording level is gorgeous. The camera angles, everything works, and still maintains a kind of informal. And I think that's the way we're moving, and I'm glad of it. I love White Tie and Tailcoat. I think men look great in it, but it's over. Okay. So anyway, it's been a great pleasure.
Pleasure to talk to you. Talk to you soon, I hope.
Okay. Bye bye.